Hello and welcome to Pontus Points, a channel where I will discuss hot topics trying to stick to facts. My conclusion will most often be neither black nor white, but within a grayscale. That makes my conclusions unpopular both with the partisan favoring the black and the partisans favoring the white. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm trying to upset everybody here. I still hope that you will eventually find that I have a point. This time we're going to discuss politics. And I have a presentation supporting that. So I have been following politics in my own country and in other countries for over 45 years by now. I was really young when I went into being interested in politics, and I was really annoyed with my grandmother when she didn't recognize Foreign Minister Kissinger when he was on the news. And I was around 5 at the time. I do have a university degree in one of the political science disciplines, but I'm not a political scientist. I don't work as that at all. So this is just like a private interest. So do take this as somebody who is interested in the area, but who is not formally an expert. And I'm really keen to ensure that the term expert is reserved for people who actually know on a professional level what they're talking about. I've also listened to American politics for a number of years, and to be honest, I'm quite confused the way that they are using the words, because for me they mean something different. It's used in context and in, understandings of the word which I don't recognize from the theory here. So bear with me if you think that these words are used used here in a way where you're when you're really familiar with them, if you're using them in an American context. I hope I'm using them correctly, but feel free to scrutiny check that with any credible source you can find. So first of all, when it comes to politics, when you have a democracy, we don't really have direct democracies anywhere. So we need to have somebody elected by the people who do most of the kind of legwork in implementing new law and principles and all of that. So, and the structure we have for that is representative democracy. A representative democracy is built on the fact that the power comes from the people, but we elect our representatives. They do the day-to-day work with the politics. We do select them for a term, which means that we make one choice, and we have to choose representatives that are representing us throughout that period. And for that to work, we are voting for people and parties that have ideologies. So principles for how they see society, what they would like to do. And based on that, you get a predictability that throughout the term that you are electing them for, or the system elects them for, they would vote in favor of how you would have voted if you had a similar vote. That is what the ideology here is all about. So if we look at the political spectrum here, let's first establish a few of the terms here. For me, liberalism is the philosophy based on the rights of individuals. So the core of liberalism is power comes from the individual. If there is a state, it's assuming that the individual is handing over parts of that individual's self-governing rights to a state. And then that state works basically on the assignment of the voters that put it in power. Liberalism is also built on political equality and equality before the law. Basic principles of liberalism as well. And I'm not going to read all of this, but I mean, freedom of speech and freedom of press and freedom of assembly and freedom of religion, these are all liberal rights. These are rights that are not handed over. They cannot be restricted by the society. If you are the strong, core, liberal individual handing over power to society, that is sort of a limit of the power that you are handing over. That's liberalism. And there are different variants of liberalism. If you look at the sort of the left side of the scale, you have social liberals, which is sort of a socialist-leaning liberal, whereas on the right you would have the right libertarians. And pardon me for pronouncing these strange, because they are long and complex words and rather difficult to say. The right libertarians here are keen to kind of have as small state as possible. They will basically aim for a night watch state, or something where the state is diminished to the absolute bare minimum. Whereas social liberals see the state as being more important and wanting to add features to that state. There are a number of benefits of liberalism. Oops, there is two L's, one small and one capital one. Sorry about that. It's supposed to be benefits of liberalism. So the entire point here, the empowered individual is the foundation for democracy and market economy. So the choice of the person is the core of both democracy and market economy. And democracy is, as Churchill coined it, the least bad system there is. Everything else is inferior to democracy. If you want something that is really efficient, you would like to have a dictator, because a dictator can do things really fast. And if there were good dictators, that would be probably an ideal thing, because then they would be really efficient and they would do really great stuff. The issue with power is that we haven't seen any example whatsoever where power didn't corrupt. So we need a structure around the government to ensure that they don't get corrupted, and there is a mean for replacing them in case we feel that there is corruption going on. So that is why democracy is long-term better than any other dictator kind of structure, because long-term democracy ensures that we have, like, power of the people is going to prevail. Market economy is also based on the consumer choices, and that is a system that has proven to work. It might not be perfect, and you need some sort of like state functionality to ensure that monopolies are handled properly and all of that. So you need basically some sort of referee in the fight between the players on market economy. But otherwise, market economy tends to ensure that the market provides what people would like to get. So it incentivizes people to walk that extra mile because there is a personal benefit from doing so. If you create your own company, you want to make it successful, and then you are ready to put in the hours, put in the effort, put in the resources you have available to you to ensure that that company is successful. And because you are also rewarded by that. If you get all the profits from the company, that's a good thing. So you risk and you can be rewarded. And also people tend to find it's more satisfying to work for themselves or do something they have chosen themselves, rather than being not guiding their own destination. So that's also sort of a benefit of market economy, which I tie really closely to liberalism. Socialism is a philosophy that has sort of a foundation in a social ownership, a joint ownership of the production resources. So it could be state or community or collective or cooperative or employee or whatever. But in this context, we're mainly focusing on the kind of state-owned. So in the utter extreme of socialism, communism, the state owns everything. Personal ownership or private ownership is sort of abolished. All ownership of everything and anything is to the state. That's sort of communism driven to the extreme, the theoretical extreme, I would say. But if you look at the other side, the more liberal socialists, you could call them social democrats. And to be quite fair, social democrats and social liberals, they are not that different. It's getting into a zone where the two ideologies sort of blend together, and then you're looking at flavors, which one you favor more. But we will get into more of that. So, are the benefits of socialism? I mean, if you're an American right-wing person, you will probably say, no, there isn't. But hear me out here. So, if you're handing over responsibility to something common, you could have efficiency and you can have economy of scale. So, any time, and anyone believing in market economy would also acknowledge that there is economy of scale. Not in every situation, in every context, but most of the time you could be more efficient if you do it for a bigger market at the same time. And handing a responsibility over to the state is handing over to somebody who would do it for more possible users at the same time. So it can be more efficient. And also looking at socialism here, they are ranging from communists to social democrats. We said that on the last slide, didn't we? So, okay, looking at ideologies here again, the traditional way of coining it is like the economic left and economic right. But a number of the more modern approaches to it add another dimension. So and the political compass is one of those that add like a different angle, so it makes it two-dimensional. Authoritarian and libertarian. Yes. So that would be if you believe that the state should be sort of the entity that has power, and the libertarian said that there should basically be no state. Normally, you would sort of think that economic left is also authoritarian and economic right is also libertarian, but that's not exactly true. So giving it this kind of shape makes it possible to put a wider array of approaches to how you place parties and politicians on the scale. Yes, let's go for the next one here. So this is my own approach of it. So for me, basically, for every person inside a democracy or inside a country, there is basically a zero-sum game of the power that the individual versus the state has. So let's say I take my 100% power. If I retain 100% of that, that means that I take responsibility for everything that is related to me. I don't have anybody else I can rely on but myself. That would be the extreme right in my scheme here. And that would be libertarian then. Whereas a communist would be on the extreme left. Society has responsibility for everything. They are running all the companies. They are doing everything in the society. You are not owning anything. You live in something that the state has provided for you. You're wearing something that the state has provided to you. It's basically like when once I did my military service, I didn't even have my own underwear. Everything I had, was provided by sort of the state. And let's say there are no real examples of anyone on the extreme left and on the extreme right. You are just looking at countries that are kind of closer to the edges than others. I don't have any good examples of anyone on the right, but on the left you would have North Korea, and then even partly moving into the more individual responsibility would be China, especially now that they are sort of experimenting with market economy inside China, but also especially adding Hong Kong to the equation. So China is no longer like on the extreme left, even if sort of their state religion or state ideology is communism. And to be fair, if I try to map democracy here, where can democracy live? I would say that if there is no state, there is no way you can elect representatives inside the state. So there is no real democracy if you are on the extreme right, because there is nothing to vote for unless there is a body where you could have representative democracy in, and that sort of is gone if there is 100% responsibility of the people and not a state. Also, if you look at the extreme left, then democracy rarely happens in communist states or heavily socialistic states. It doesn't really compute. You basically need to move into social democrats and even sort of the democratic communists. You have to believe in democracy and still want the state to run most of the things to be still sort of within the democratic framework. And so communism would be the lighter forms of communism would still be a stretch to put them inside a democratic bubble. Yes. Okay. Well, if you look at the economic right and economic left here, pros and cons again. So if you move towards the economic right, the incentives increases to risk stuff in order to succeed. You are richly rewarded if you win, but there is no safety net because there is no society to catch you if you fall. But if you succeed, you enrich yourself and you create jobs for others as a consequence for that. But there is, of course, also always a risk that you turn predator and exploit in order to be richer, because there is nothing to stop you. If there is no society, if there is no kind of referee in the game, there is always the risk that corporations turn evil. And also on the extreme right, I mean, if you fail, there is nothing to catch you. So there are like pros and cons of moving too far into that direction. On if you're looking at sort of the state side, the economic left here, the incentive is not to do your best because the society might provide for you even if you don't do your best. So the incentives are not there. You could have sort of the same living standard whether you work or not, so it doesn't really matter. And that removes all the incentive. Why should you risk anything if there is nothing to gain? But on the positive side, of course, if you do risk anything and if you fail, there is always a safety net to catch you. So here it would seem like a balance is reasonable. There should be enough incentives for anybody to try, because everybody benefits if a number of people try and a number of people succeed, because that provides job for everybody. Whereas it's also good to have like a safety net so that it's okay to try and fail, because you will not be sort of living on the street if you failed once. Yes, and adding another term here, which is very difficult to say. Utilitarianism. Yeah, well, Jeremy Bentham's old philosophy here that you should try to maximize the happiness and well-being of all affected individuals here. So looking at that perspective, if we have that as sort of a baseline, that could be a really good baseline for what is sort of the best system. And if you have that as a baseline, the key becomes to make sure that the country is doing really well. The society is doing really well, because if the society is doing well, that can only happen if the individuals and the companies inside a country is doing really well. So this is not a zero-sum game. So a country can do better than others and can do really, really good, and that would help everybody inside the society. That's sort of my starting point when I look at politics. If the country benefits, there is a greater degree of probability that everybody benefits inside the country, even if the benefits might be distributed unevenly. I don't find it important that everybody gets the same slice of the pie. As long as everybody gets pie, we should strive to grow the pie, which is sort of what this philosophy also kind of dictates. So let's look at the number of successful countries, and I will first like to show you this one. So this is Engelhard Welsel's World Cultural Map of 2022. So this is the most recent one I could find, and it's from last year, so it's really recent. On the x-axis here you have survival versus self-expression values. So that means that on the left you would find countries with a rather low GDP. They are whatever they are doing is like trying to survive the day, getting fed throughout the day. Whereas the further right you go, you would find countries that are sort of they have enough money and they are fighting sort of luxurious problems. And there is great similarity between this and the stairs of Maslow. So first you have your basic needs, and you have more and more esoteric needs, and self-expression is sort of on the highest staircase of the Maslow stairs as well. So that one is sort of similar. But then on the left you have traditional versus secular values. So high degree of religion or low degree of religion is sort of what you have on and not only religion, of course. If you have traditions other than religions, traditions rooted deeply within you. So if your view on gender or who can have which work and all of that, that's probably a traditional thing, whereas the secular value is more like, let's step away from that. Everything is possible for everyone, and a number of aspects of that. If we just look at the map here, you would see that up in the top right, so very secular countries who are doing really well financially, you see a lot of Protestant Europe. And to be honest, a lot of those are not, well, Protestant would be, yes, we used to be Protestant, but most of those are now rather secular countries where less than half of the population has sort of ties to any of the religion whatsoever. The country might still predominantly have a rooting towards Protestant Christianity, but most people aren't religious anyway. And then on the sort of left here, you have a lot of the African and Islamic countries who are fighting to get food on the table, but also very deeply rooted in religion and tradition. Keep this in mind. So looking at the number of the reports here, there is a World Happiness Report, and of course you can question the validity of this, but again, this one is from 2022, where you see a number of countries listed here according to how happy they are. And anyone who ever met a Finn would be doubting that the results are valid, because sometimes they tend to be very very dark-souled and given the way that they speak. But that is, of course, an internal joke. Let's map these to that again. So if you look at those, a number of the happiest people on the planet are up here on the upper right. Of course, if you're fighting for putting food on your table, it's very difficult to also be super happy, possibly. But also add the fact that religion here tends to be not correlating with happiness here. So from this, without saying anything else, it doesn't seem like religion is a valid path to happiness. Financial success seems to be a better approach to being happy. So if you choose working to get to maximize your country's GDP, or focusing on religion, I would say, looking at this, you should really, really focus on maximizing the country's GDP. If you look at the most innovative countries, this is from World Intellectual Property Organization. I believe that's a UN branch. You have the 10 most innovative economies on the planet. Again, if we're mapping this towards this, it seems like the countries who are doing really well because they are innovating, or if they are doing well, they might as well innovate. If there is a cause and effect, or this is a correlation, I couldn't tell. But also here it seems like innovation and religion seems to be at least not correlating, right? That's worth a consideration. So correlation and cause and effect. First of all, if two things happen at the same time, so you have two graphs, they look the same, there is a correlation. If I get red in my face and there is a high degree of a high temperature outside, there is a correlation between those things happen. But is it the sun that makes me red, or is it something else? Well, in this case, it's actually causation, because the sun actually makes my skin turn red. So it's not only a correlation, it's a cause and effect. But just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean that there is a causation. It could just be correlation. And the cause is something else. But it seems strongly possible that it's absolutely sure that there is a correlation between happy country and secular democracies with a fairly strong public sector. Is there a correlation, or is it a cause and effect? I wouldn't know. I have my opinion, and it's guesswork because I don't have the actual facts to prove it, but it's quite clear that correlation is there. The same countries also have a strong culture for innovation. Again, correlation or cause and effect. I wouldn't know. I have an opinion, but I would imagine that it's very difficult to dispute the correlation here. So, what is the best mix? Well, first of all, I would say that you should think of how you should make your country competitive. Not only how you can enrich yourself, but how you can make your country competitive. Because eventually that will trickle down. And I know trickle-down economy is sort of a controversial term. I don't mean lowering the tax for everybody in order to ensure that money is trickled down. This is another aspect of trickle-down. So, in general, I would imagine that the perfect balance between incentives, ensuring that I could risk stuff and keep most of the benefits of that, and a small public sector, meaning that I would have to pay as little tax as possible, but still pay enough money to ensure that there are equal opportunities of everybody. For once, education, ensuring free education for everybody, because we want to ensure that not only people with money have the opportunity of being educated and sort of getting access to good jobs and all of that. People who have the skill set and ambition should get that, not people who inherited money. I think that's where a number of countries go wrong, that they are not giving access to free education to the broad population. Then you are wasting a number of the talents born in your country, those who are not well off to start with. So, what should we distribute? Where should we sort of add the socialist dimension, stuff we should have the society do? Well, first of all, the legal system is intertwined with the political system, and that needs to be public. There is no way you can have like private courts or private police or private authorities. It doesn't really make sense. They need to be tied to the actual government because they are sort of the government. Military. Well, if you look in Palestine, you would have the Hamas and Fatwa. They're basically two branches of the Palestinians here, and they have basically their own army. So the two leading political parties have their own armies. That is not a good idea. The army should belong to the country, or the military. There are branches of the military, but let's say the army for simplicity here. The army should belong to the country, which means that when political parties argue, there is no risk that would turn into actual war with military people involved. It will be a political struggle, not a military struggle. So military should absolutely belong to the state. Also stuff like infrastructure, roads and railroads. I mean, the actual tracks and the actual tarmac you put on the ground, it doesn't make sense to have 5 in parallel where people try to sell that you should go on their tarmac rather than on the competing tarmac. Stuff like that makes sense to have done once. That is sort of the economy of scale. That's the place where a state-planned structure for communication actually comes in handy, rather than having this handled on like on a competitive basis. I'm 100% sure that market economy is really great. But this is not an area where market economy is going to excel. You could have the train companies compete with customers for doing the actual kind of transport service, but the track for railroad and the tarmac for roads, they are better handled by the government or like the central state. Welfare, this is highly debatable, especially if you have profit in the area. Healthcare and education. For me, it makes a lot of sense that everybody should have access to education, and most education should be available basically for free. So we should chip in money, because that is an investment in making our country competitive and strong. If we invest in education for everybody and pay the tax for that to happen, to give everybody an opportunity, if we are running a company later, you would have well-educated employees, and you would also have other people starting companies who would pay in tax, who could provide for pension system and stuff like that afterwards, and pay for great healthcare and all of that. So we would like to have everybody well educated, because eventually we all benefit from that. Okay, so if I try to summarize my own view here, I would say that I would like liberalism with a healthy mix of socialism, because my starting point is still that the liberal values are the key ones. Everything starts with the individual, the choices the individual makes in terms of democracy and in terms of market economy. But there are aspects where we need to look at the society, because it's not also that alone is strong in every case. There are economy of scale aspects, and also aspects that you are not always strong enough and you need help from somebody, and that somebody could be the society. So we must allow differences. So somebody must be able to win, gain more than the others. So inequality, that must be there, because if we don't have that, then we will also not ensure that there is incentive for people to try to walk that extra mile. And eventually everybody loses if that isn't available. But we also have to ensure that when people are down on their luck, temporary or permanently, we are humans, and we also would like to ensure that anybody who could be a productive participant in our society should have the opportunity of doing that and being that. So if they are down on their luck for a short period of time, let's have a system that catches them, bring them up to speed again, and then off they go so they could contribute again to society. I think society as a whole wins, and I think we all win, even if that costs us tax money. That was everything I had planned to say. Thank you so much for watching, and looking to see you sometime next, whenever I feel that I haven't slept enough and need to get something on video to ensure that I can not ponder over it and lose sleep over it. Thank you so much. Bye bye.